the National Park Service, an archaeologist, who will be presenting work on the research that his organization has been carrying out for a number of years, in part at the Tyndall Air Force Base, 8 years as a matter of fact, in investigating woodland occupation of the area, using a combination of archaeological survey and excavation, archival research, LiDAR imagery, systematic probing, and even cadaver dogs to reveal much more about the site than what was originally reported by the early C.B. Moore. And I don't want to spoil his talk, so I won't belabor the issue, except to say that last year at the Southeast Archaeological Conference, I heard some information about the research that the Southeast Archaeological Center has been doing. It's really great, so we enjoyed this talk. So I welcome Jeff Shanks.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it. That's right. I'm going to be talking about some of the work that the Southeast Archaeological Center here in Tallahassee has been doing at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City. And it's actually 10 years that they've been working there. And some of this work actually predates me. Mike Russo has been the lead for much of that work. First time to meet Mike, and he's here tonight. We're going to go through, this will sort of be kind of a synopsis and a summing up of a lot of that work that's been done over the last decade, and give you an idea of where we're at with that and what we've learned in the process. So my talk is Prehistoric Peoples on the Redneck Riviera. It's rediscovering the woodland cultures of coastal woodland Florida. Now, I say woodland, but really we're going to be talking about the middle and late woodland, which around here dates to around AD 100 to 1000, give or take. We talked to you maybe a little earlier, a little later. And when we talk about the woodland period, the late woodland period in this area, we're really talking about two cultures, or at least two archaeological cultures. And that's the Swift Creek people and the Wheaton Island people. And as you can see here, the green area is the Swift Creek culture, which is, that's considered more the middle woodland culture. And it spreads out over most of Georgia, North Florida, into Alabama. The area, it's a little hard to see, but with the diagonal orange lines there, that's the area encompassed by the Wheaton Island culture. And that's more of a late woodland culture, although there is some overlap between the two. Now, the Swift Creek culture, as I said, it's earlier, and they're characterized by these complicated stamped vessels with really elaborate designs, lots of interesting patterns. And these were made by carving wooden paddles and then stamping the designs in. Mary mentioned Dr. Lou Hill, who's going to be giving a talk at the next past meeting. It's going to be on these Swift Creek designs and the research she's been doing on these different design patterns, looking for matches from different sites over great distances. Now, the Swift Creek people also were part of what's known as the Hopewell Interaction Student. This was a exchange network across most of the eastern United States during the Middle Woodlands, and you would get exotic artifacts from all over the country coming down into this area, things like copper and galena and mica. At the same time, things from down here, like shell, were heading up north to find conch shell, for example, in Ohio and some of those sites. And so there was this widespread exchange network, and a lot of these exotic items would make it down here, even to places as remote as Tyndall, one we're talking about tonight. A lot of these exotic artifacts would end up in burial contexts. These were highly valued items, having traveled so far. Now, the Wheaton Island culture is a little bit later, although there's some overlap, and its ceramics are characterized by incised designs rather than stamping, incised and punctations. And even more importantly, there's a whole class of these effigy vessels that appeared in the Wheaton Island period, with figurines and animal shapes. And these are vessels that were often intended purely for a mortuary context. These went straight into burial mounds. These were burial goods. A lot of times vessels that end up in a burial mound are ritually killed. They'll have a hole poked in the bottom so they can't be used again. Sometimes with Wheat and Island vessels, they were made already fired with holes in the bottom, pre-killed. So there's this sort of, they have this special class of mortuary ceramics, which makes them somewhat unique in the area. Now, although we have different ceramic types, a lot of things are very similar about these two living cultures. They both buried their dead in mounds, for example, both Swift Creek and Wheat Island. They lived in villages, usually very close to their burial mounds, circular villages, often with plazas. And in the archaeological record, this ends up showing up as circular middens, trash piles that surrounded the village. So they would have their houses in a circle, they'd have a plaza in the center where ceremonies and communal activity would take place. They'd throw their garbage behind their houses, and that would form these middens around the outside of where the living area was. And that's what we see in the archaeological record. In this case, this is a map of a Wheat Island village with the ceramics. This is all a ceramic map, basically, where they were discarded, but it makes a circular pattern. On the coast, here, coastal sites, we often find lots of shellfish remains. That was their primary food source, people living on the coast. And so we get these circular middens full of shell, full of ceramics, full of bone, that demarcate these habitation areas in the living period. Now, most of the mounds, burial mounds in this area, were excavated a century ago by this man, Clarence B. Moore, C.B. Moore. He was an antiquarian who traveled around the southeast, excavating sites. Unfortunately, as it was at the times, he wasn't that great at recording things the way we would like him to have done. But he had a fascination for highly decorated vessels. He was really interested in museum pieces. And he was particularly interested in those Wheat Island ceramics, those effigy vessels that I showed you earlier. And so he went through pretty much every known mound in this area along the coast and obliterated them, essentially. And he recorded it some, but not as much as we would like. There's very little burial information. He would often record the number of burials, but that was about it. It makes it very difficult for us today to try and go back and reconstruct what was there. But he's somebody we have to live with. And we have all of his publications. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his publications at the Big Plates and all. But today what I'm going to be talking about is SEAC's search for a number of these lost mounds at Tyndall Air Force Base near Panama City. He excavated a number of mounds in the area in 1901, 1902, and later in 1918 he revisited the area. But after that, their locations were lost and remained lost, really just until the last few years for the most part. Only one, you can see all the red dots, were mounds that Moore excavated on the Tyndall Peninsula. Only one of those was known when SEAC started their project, for sure. Gordon Willey in the 1940s tried to relocate a lot of these mounds, but he was unable to, so he ended up basically putting dots on a map based on Moore's descriptions as best he could. He did make a few mistakes that we found out. For example, Moore talks about two different mounds on Davis Point. And so Gordon Willey put them both at the end of the Tyndall Peninsula here, which is called Davis Point. But after doing some research, it turns out, and I believe it was Craig Dingle, some of you may know, that actually figured this out. Only one of these mounds is actually here. The other Davis mound is over here on the mainland. And so Gordon Willey had located it here, but that's really a phantom. So we were able to eliminate one of these mounds. The other Davis Point mound, it is there, it is more or less extant, but unfortunately it's been covered up by a golf course today. So we know about where it is, but it's on the back nine now. We had been unable to get to it. However, the recent sequester has shut the golf course down, so the possibility of sneaking in there, I don't see that. Now, SEAC began in 2004 looking for some of these mounds, trying to relocate these mounds that we knew were sort of in the area, but didn't know exactly where they were. And one of the first ones that they went after was Pearl Bayou. It's right there in the center. And now Pearl Bayou, and it has some issues with its nomenclature. There's a midden there in the area. Willie found a midden. It was kind of in the area. He assumed this was probably the midden that went along with the Pearl Bayou mound. But the mound itself couldn't be found. Prentice Thomas and Associates in the 1980s, I believe, also went through the area, and they found a midden. And not realizing it was the same one that Willie had found, they gave it a new name and called it Bayview. But we're pretty sure this is the same midden that would have been associated with the Pearl Bayou mound that Moore excavated. So this would be the village area that went along with that mound. The mound still hasn't been located. Now, SEAC went and did systematic shovel testing in the area, and unfortunately, this area now has houses over it. So it's been developed right on top of the old village midden. But you can see here the ring shape. This is a ceramic density map. So these are all the ceramics. You can see the village here. These are the roads going around it. And you have houses going all the way around here with a common area in the middle, which I find absolutely interesting. This is military housing. And it seems whether by coincidence or for whatever reason, they have essentially occupied the same pattern that the Indians living here did. Living in this village with basically a plaza in the center. It's almost right on the same footprint. It's kind of intriguing. But still, the mound was not located. That was the village area. Now, doing systematic shovel testing allowed us to create various density maps. This is a map of all of just the Swift Creek ceramics that were found at the Pearl Bayou Bed. And so you can see it makes this a sort of a smaller ring shape. Each one of these piles was probably a house, living in this small circle. Then when you look at the Weeden Island, the later Weeden Island ceramics, it's a much bigger circle. So you get the idea that maybe this site started as a small Swift Creek settlement that then expanded and got larger during the Weeden Island period, as these Weeden Island ceramics come in. But since this was so heavily developed, a lot of it's disturbed. It's hard to really draw any conclusions with it. Now, a more interesting and probably a slightly more difficult search was for two mounds, Strange's Mound and Baker's Mound. And Strange's Mound was a Weeden Island mound. Baker's was a Swift Creek mound that were excavated by Moore. And this was a little tricky. There were several proposed locations for these mounds. Willie, again, tried to find them, but was unable to. So he basically just put dots on a map. He put Baker's, BY29, he put it right here, and Strange's, the Weeden Island mound, BY26, he just put here. Those are really sort of arbitrary choices. Now, Gary Knudsen in the 1970s was doing a pedestrian survey through Tyndall, and he found a midden along the shoreline here, about in that area, which he identified as the midden that would go along with the Baker's mound, the Weeden Island mound. But again, the mound itself, he was unable to locate it. It turns out, after we went in and did a survey here, that he was very close. The actual mound is right here. The midden that he found was the village midden, and the mound was just here. If he had gone a little further in the woods, he would have found the mound. So Willie was actually fairly close on this one. The Strange's mound, he was off. Like I said, he put a sort of an arbitrary dot here based on Moore's vague description. For some reason, the state site file moved it and located it here in the middle of the Cantonin area. Not really sure what the reason was for it. But we went back and did some archival research. We went to Moore's description, and he mentioned some of the property owners in there, and you have to tease it out a little bit in his sort of vague description, but we were able to go back to some of the deeds in the courthouse and find who owned what lots. And from that, and just based on his descriptions and measuring it out, we assumed that it should be somewhere in this area. And so we put our first survey area there. We were going to survey several different areas, but it turns out we got it right the first time, and it was here. And the resource officer there on the base had noticed some shell in this area as well. And so we figured that was probably a good place to look, and it turned out to be right. Now, in order to find it, again, we did systematic shovel test surveys at both of these sites. This one is Baker's Landing, and here you can see this is the topo. You can sort of see, even in the topo map, you can see that ring shape where the village was. Down here is the mound, kind of cut off right there. Now, this was a pure Swift Creek site. There's no Wheaton Island ceramics here at all. So this is presumably an earlier site. And here's with our shovel testing, you can see the blues are positives, so that sort of made that ring shape. Down here is the mound. So again, this is sort of your typical pattern, the ring-shaped village with the adjacent mound. Again, with the systematic shovel test, we were able to create density maps and separate the artifacts out. You can see that's midden soil there. That's ceramic density, shell, and bone. So in all these different artifacts, you get that nice circular pattern. Now, Strange's Landing, this is the Wheaton Island village. If you look here, the diameter on the Swift Creek one is about 80 meters or so in diameter. Strange's ring, the Wheaton Island one, is about twice that size. It's about 150 meters in diameter, so much larger. So again, it's very similar to the pattern at Bayview or Pearl Bayou, where you get these smaller Swift Creek villages and then the larger Wheaton Island village. We did shovel tests, systematic shovel tests here as well. And this one, the mound is kind of off the grid, but it's right up here to the northwest. And then you can see here the ring pattern. Again, distribution maps showing the different artifacts in this in that ring shape pattern. So we're starting to get a little bit of a pattern here and understanding what's going on. You seem to get these smaller Swift Creek rings and the larger Wheaton Island rings. So what we really wanted to do was take a look at the Hare Hammock site. Now, Hare Hammock is interesting in that it's a double mound site. There's two mounds there, and Moore called them the larger mound at Hare Hammock and the smaller mound. It wasn't very original in its naming. But it turns out there's also two ring middens there. There's a larger Wheaton Island period ring and a smaller Swift Creek period ring. And so it's sort of a double site. And we thought this would be a really interesting one to look at, because here in one location you get that full occupation from Swift Creek to Wheaton Island. But unlike the Bayview site, it's not all jumbled together. It hasn't been developed. And so we thought this might be a great site to really sort of understand that transition between the middle and late woodland. So this is the smaller Swift Creek ring, and its adjacent mound. This is the larger Wheaton Island ring with its mound. And this is BY 30 and 31. Those are the smaller mound at Hare Hammock and the larger mound at Hare Hammock. Now you can see again we did systematic shovel test survey. Here, the interesting one to note are the ceramics. These are all the Wheaton Island ceramics. You can see they cover the larger ring. Nothing down here at all for the smaller ring. No Wheaton Island at all. For the Swift Creek ring. Down here for the Swift Creek ceramics. This is the Swift Creek ring down here. You do get a few Swift Creek shows in the Wheaton Island ring. Now, in order to sort of fine-tune things, we did a technique that Mike Russo has really perfected, and that's shell probing shell beds. And you can see this is Dan Seinfeld, who I'm sure some of you know. He's pushing a metal probe into the ground, and the way it works, you use this probe to feel the top of the shell, and then you go down to get to the bottom of the shell, and then you measure that distance, and so you're able to figure out what the thickness of the shell midden is at the point that you're putting in the probe. And then we shoot it in with a total station so that we can create a map. So you basically have X, Y, Z data, and you can then map the thickness of the shell midden over the site. And it gives you a much more accurate map than just shovel testing alone at wide intervals. So here's our shell probe map laid over the ceramic map. The blue is the ceramics distribution. The orange is the shell. And so already you can sort of see some differences. Here down in the Swift Creek, and you've got a lot of shell going all the way around. With the Wheaton Island ring, it's only in certain areas. You can get this one area over here where there's no ceramics at all. It may have just been purely for processing shellfish. So we decided to open up some block excavations. This was in 2011, summer 2011, I believe. You can see there's Julie Bird right there. This is Dr. She used to work at SEAT. We decided to, using that shell map as our guide, we opened up some block excavations in the smaller Swift Creek ring. We wanted to put in some units right on the inside of this midden. We're hoping to capture the area that would have been the habitation area, maybe catch some features, maybe even a habitation structure of some sort. And so we opened up these large block excavations, and we were pretty successful. We found some post holes and several other features. The following summer, Becky Saunders brought some of her students from LSU over, and we had a field school. So we were able to continue our excavations and open up the block further and put in some units in the center of the ring, in the plaza. We found a number of features. Here we found, this was in the block excavation up north, we found 3 post holes, which may have been part of the structure, right on the inside of the midden. The midden runs along this way. So we had post holes just on the inside. It looked like we might have had sort of an ovular structure here. We also found right behind this proposed structure a cache of stone tools. So if this was a house facing the plaza this way, this would have been behind it, between the house and the midden. And you can see here all these stone tools we found here. They are cleaned up. A number of different things, almost a tool kit. Very graders, nutting stones, manos, metates, and some interesting stuff. We found lots of what we might think of as ceremonial material, lots of quartz and mica, ochre, all throughout this area where this structure must have been. Then we found this guy, who's awfully cute. This was found right in the area of those post holes, and this is a little effigy head. This was broken off of ceramic of some sort. This is actually the sort of thing you normally would associate more with Wheaton Island ceramic. Remember, we're in the Swift Creek ring here. But Swift Creek did have figurines. This guy actually had a top knot that's broken off, and you can see right here, this is a sort of stylized ear spool. So this was probably belonged on a vessel that would have ended up in the burial mound, but got broken off and sort of debitized probably. In the plaza, we found several pit features with some really interesting stuff inside of it. We found this mono or metate, or mortar and pestle, for those that know those terms. This was buried in this pit in the center of the plaza. This, on the mortar here, you see this black stuff here, sort of ground into it. We did a piezo-ref analysis of it, portable X-ray fluorescence, and the iron content went off the charts. So this was probably hematite or ochre that was being ground up by this. So this was being used then for ceremonial purposes. This wasn't just for grinding up food or crushing nuts. This was used for ceremonial purposes, grinding up ochre, and then these tools were buried ritually there in the plaza. We can assume that that's the case, because if it was just garbage, they could have just walked over to the bin and tossed it. But instead, they intentionally placed it in this burial pit in the plaza. Also in the pit of the plaza, we found a engraved stone gorget. And this is definitely an exotic item. It's not from around here. It's made of some kind of slate. We found similar ones in, where was it, Mike? We found a similar one?
Ohio.
Ohio, all right.
Similar design.
Yeah, so again, this is that Hopewell interaction sphere right here. We have some evidence of it. This is part of the archaic point. So this is several thousand years before this Roman period. They found this archaic point and saved it, and obviously realized that it was old and had value to them. And it was buried in this pit, which we radiocarbonated the pit in the Roman period. So here's a look at the Swift Creek Ring, Harrison Ring, is what it's called. And you can see up here, this is a large block excavation where we found the postal holes and the cash stone tools. These were some units we put into the plaza where we found the slate gorget and mono and tate. And that brings us to the mound. Now, one of the problems with this was determining where the actual smaller mounded hair hammock that Moore excavated was located. There is this sort of lumpy area here that kind of looked like a mound, but it's in an odd place. It's abutting right up against the midden, which is a little strange. Normally these mounds are separated from the village by little ways. There is a borrow pit over here, which is a typical characteristic of these mounds. Usually there'll be a borrow pit right next to them. So it had some things that made it look like a mound, some things that didn't. We've sort of assumed that this was a mound for lack of anything else in the area. But we were never really able to prove it. We had been we put in several test units, and we would get ceramics and things like that. There was no min soil, it was all sand, so it looked like it could have been a mound. But we were really never able to prove it for sure. Here you can see, here's a topo, you can see that borrow pit, the proposed mound there. So what we did, now, was anybody here for Susie Goodhope's presentation with her cadaver dog last fall? Some of you may have been here for that. Well, after seeing that presentation, that gave us the idea that, hey, maybe she could help us out. What if we were to take the dog out here? Could Shiraz, her dog, find a burial this old, over 1,000 years old? Which is somewhat unprecedented, at least in North America. And Susie was good enough to come out with us and give it a try. And she's actually here tonight. Look at that, Susie. There you go. There she is. She brought Shiraz out, and we actually tested it first on the larger mound here hammock, which was a known mound, and we had actually repatriated some remains there, so we knew where they were at. And the dog was able to, just as a test and sort of control, the dog was able to find those with no problem. But still, that wasn't the same because those were repatriated remains. So even though they were old remains, they had just been reburied within the last few years. So walking across this other mountain trying to find undisturbed remains was a little tricky. But we gave it a try, and this will work. Actually, a little video of Shiraz in action here. And that's Susie right there. And we just sort of gave her the general area, and Shiraz went all over, up on the hypothetical mound, the proposed mound, went all around it, went over the midden, where there's lots of animal bone in the midden, didn't set her off at all. You can see it's pretty thick in there. But you can sort of see, and it's amazing to watch Shiraz work. She would just sort of circle around and kind of weave in and out and start getting closer and closer, almost like a shark, kind of circling in. Sort of tell. And there'll be times when she'll be walking, you can see her turn her head like that, where she'll go out there. You can see there's me, it's still a little dubious. Not sure what to make of this. Because we've been trying for years to prove this is a mound and haven't been completely unsuccessful. the, you can see right here, and there it is, there's a hit right there. So, Shiraz, hit on this spot. We, still a little dubious. We had to ground shoot this, of course. So we put in just a 50 by 50 shuttle test to see. And, at this point, even Susie's trying to downplay her expectations. They're pointing out, look, there's a lot of trees around here. Trees can bring the scent up. So it could be that, Shiraz got the hit here. Really, it could be anywhere around this area. And you've got to remember, too, that Moore has dug up this mound already. So whatever's still here is really just his backfill, piled back up. It's not like there's going to be any intact burials left in it. There'll just be fragments, if anything. And so even the chances of hitting anything, it was really remote. Even if she was getting a scent on human remains somewhere in this mound, to actually nail it would have been really almost impossible. But we put in a 50 by 50 unit. We went down a meter, and there at the bottom we pulled out that. We got a human toe bone out of that. And the base actually ended up doing radiocarbon dating on it because there's historic burials in the area too, to see if it was historical or Native American. And it came back with a date in the late 600s, so around 650, 700 thereabouts. So Shiraz was able to nail with a 50 by 50 perfectly a 1,300-year-old toe bone a meter down. It was really the previous record for North America was, several hundred years, I think? So she blew the previous record out of the water with that. Well done. And for us, that was good. We were finally, we've been presenting papers on this, we're pretty sure it's now. Sort of, now finally we can say this is a small amount of organic for sure. And now it will be preserved and treated as such. So with that, we have more of a picture now of what's going on here. We have, again, this site, it's a complex of two different cultures here. We start with the Swift Creek, with the small ring village and mound here, and then they expand later to this larger village with its own mound. But you can see here comparing some of two of the Swift Creek sites. So here's Baker's Landing, which was the Swift Creek village, with Harrison Landing, the smaller rigging and Hammock. Very similar. What's interesting too, if you look at the shell distribution, you can see really they're processing shell all over the village. It's pretty uniform all the way around. Same thing here. This is the shell density of Baker's. But it's a little different with the Weeden Island villages. Here's Stranges and Hammock. You can see here the orange is the shell. They're only processing shell in part of the village. Things are getting spread out, so maybe that there's getting to the point where they're using certain parts of the village for certain things. Just kind of interesting. Another kind of interesting thing, if you look at a comparison of some of the Swift Creek villages in here and Weeden Island villages, one thing we noticed, at least at Kendall, it seemed like with the Weeden Island villages, the mounds tended to be on the northwest side. There's Stranges, there's Hare Hammock, Bayview, we don't know where the mound is. It may have been destroyed with that housing development. At Mound Field, which is in McCullough County, south of here, also you do another Weeden Island where you get the mound on the northwest side. The Swift Creek don't seem to have that pattern. It's a little more random, it seems, anyway. We don't have a huge sample size, but it's an interesting kind of thing. It's possibly a coincidence, and the more I get into this, the less I think there's anything to it. But at that time, that angle, this would have been, this may have been something of a solstitial alignment. In other words, aligned with the winter solstice. On the winter solstice, the sun would have set right behind the mound if you were standing in the center of the plaza. But, like I said, we have a sample of 3, so, yeah, I don't know. But there are some of the other Weed Island sites, like McKeithen, there are assisted alignments, so it's not that crazy. They did seem to have some sort of solar thing going on. We just don't really know much about it. Now, another thing that was really cool about Hare Hammock is Julie Bird and I were working on a side project involving radiocarbon dating. One of the problems with radiocarbonating shell is it tends to be very inaccurate. And a lot of the dates we had been getting over the years, we had dates from Bakers and Stranges and from Pearl Bayou, but all these dates were from shell. And shell is problematic because anything in the water, it tends to absorb carbon at a different rate than things on the land. And so your radiocarbon dates can be off by several hundred years. And so Julie Bird and I were working on a project to try and correct for that here locally. And so we would do things like getting paired dates in features. We had a pit feature, we had shell in there, and we had soot on a shirt or a turkey bone or something there. We would date both of them and then use the difference there to calculate what the correction would be for shell. And we ended up having mixed results. Some shell works better than others. But the bottom line is, just doing this project, we ended up with almost 24 dates at the sites. And a lot of them weren't shell, a lot of them were good dates from bone and charcoal and other things. So with that, we were able to establish a really good chronology for this entire complex, from the Swift Creek period all the way up through the Weed Island period. And 24 radiocarbon dates is a lot of dates for a site this size. And so this is really valuable information. So with that, we can sort of create a chronology here. It began around AD 400 or 500 with this Swift Creek, small little Swift Creek village and mound. It came into use around 400 to 500 or so. We know that because we have dates from below the mound, from the old ground surface below the mountain. So we know when the mound was constructed. Somewhere around 675, 725, around 700, we get this new, larger Weed Island mound. The Weed Island ceramics come into the area. The Swift Creek Ring and Mound are abandoned very quickly, very rapidly, maybe within a generation. And everybody shifts over to this larger village, and they build a new mound. Very rapidly. That stays in use for another several hundred years until it goes out around 1,000 or 1,100. So it's kind of an interesting thing that the shift would be so abrupt. And they change the way they're doing things, right off the bat. Like I said, I mentioned earlier the shell distribution. They're already sort of organizing themselves a little bit differently. And at first, when we were seeing all these small Swift Creek villages and then the larger Weed Island villages later, the natural assumption is, okay, well that makes sense. They start out small, their population is increasing, so then they're having larger villages, right? Well, this kind of, now that we have a good chronology here, now we're not so sure about that. Basically, now we can say that this smaller Swift Creek village was in occupation about the same time as this larger one, about 250, 300 years or so. So they were in use for about the same period of time. But look at the shell. Look how much shell there is here. Now, unless there was you would expect if there's an increase in population, there should be a lot more shell over here if these were in occupation for the same amount of time, right? It turns out there's actually more shell here in this Swift Creek, this smaller village. So maybe there wasn't an increase in population. Maybe they're just more spread out here for whatever reason. Maybe they had another reason to expand their village, to have a larger plaza. Something other than an increase in population. Now, another thing, presumably the mounds were also in use for the same amount of time. But there's a different amount of burials in them. More recorded only 8 burials in this one, and 30-something in this one, even though they're in use for about the same amount of time. So something's going on there. Presumably people are dying at about the same rate. Now, Moore does describe one large cache burial, or mass burial, in this larger mound. One of these, he counts it as one burial, but he says it's multiple individuals all jumbled up together in one big mass grave, which may suggest a reinterment. So it may be the reason there's so few burials in this mound is that a lot of them were dug up and moved and reinterred in this new mound. So you don't do that except for ceremonial reasons. There's some sort of change that comes in with the introduction of these new mortuary ceramics, these weed island effigy wares. There's more to it than that. There must be some sort of change in ideology, in mortuary ideology, that's accompanying this introduction of ceramics. Something that makes them have to go and dig up their ancestors and move them over here to this new mound. Okay. So something's going on here. There's a really abrupt shift. And so what we're starting to see, possibly here in the archaeological record, is something very nebulous. And that's evidence of a change in ceremonialism, a change in ideology. So here's some of those mortuary vessels. It may be that there's more to it than just ceramics. The Hopewell interaction sphere started to break down around 500, and access to those exotic goods from the Ohio Valley was being shut off. And so it may be that these fancy ceramics may have been something of a replacement for that. Maybe that's what helped them in popularity. So with this in mind, we're sort of shifting away from timber now that we sort of have an idea of what's going on with these woodland villages in the area. And we're changing focus now and looking at some of the sites south of town here in Tallahassee. This is Bird Hammock, and this is in Wakulla. And it's a very similar site. It's a very similar site to Hare Hammock. This is a LiDAR imagery here. You can see this is a large ring here. You can see there's a surfer map of it, shows it a little bit better. And this is a mound. This is, Judy Bentz did her thesis dissertation on this site. But this is a predominantly weed and island ring here with a mound up here. This, it's kind of messed up, but it appears that this may have been a smaller Swift Creek ring. It's been mined for shell, and so it's messed up. And this is a smaller, another mound down here. So again, we may have the same pattern, this dual site, where it began as a smaller Swift Creek village, and then became a larger, more expanded Green Island village. So this is a site we've now taken an interest in, and just in the last couple of weeks, we'd already been interested in the site, looking at it because of the similarities. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've been in contact with Dr. Lou Hill, who's going to be giving the next past presentation. And as I mentioned, he's doing a lot of work with Swift Creek paddle designs, the paddles that he used to stamp those intricate patterns. And in looking through his collection, we found a paddle match between a vessel that came out of this Swift Creek mound here at Bird Hammock and several vessels, more than one vessel from Hare Hammock. Not just a design match, let me emphasize that, a paddle match. You go in and you can measure the width of the lands and see. So the same wooden paddle was used to stamp a vessel over at Tyndall, in a mound over there. It was used to stamp a vessel that came out of this mound here in Wakulla County, south of town here. So there's some sort of interaction going on. What that means, we don't know yet. Speculate? Well, there's several possibilities. It could be trade going back and forth, an exchange of things. It could be that there's a central location where somebody is making these, and the pots are going out from there, or people are coming to meet at a certain location where the pots are being made. It could be that there's marriages going back and forth, and that people take the paddles with them. It's a family heirloom, and you marry and go to another village, you bring the paddle with you. So there's a number of possibilities. But there certainly seems to be something going on. There's some sort of interaction. That's something we want to explore. I mentioned earlier we're doing about using the shell, probing for shell in order to get a tighter map without having to do shell tests, without having to have a ton of artifacts and shell to deal with. Well, we're working now, and this is really Mike's brainchild, and he's working with some of the engineers at Fannier to create the next generation probe. And it's a device that's called the penetrometer, which sounds kind of nefarious. But the idea is that what it will do, it's actually going to be a modified version of something that geologists already use. It's a probe that you put in the ground and it measures compaction and cohesion and things like that. So we're hoping to be able to probe the ground and be able to not just pick up where shell is. I mean, we should be able to record shell, but also maybe hidden soil, based on the different cohesion, so that we can go around and probe and maybe map out some of these sites without having to make shovel tests, without having to have tons of artifacts to deal with. And we're hoping to do that, make Bird Hammock our test site. So we're looking to do that this year, this summer. So, and while we're at it, I'm sure we'll be putting in a few. We'll have to ground treat it, so there'll be a few units. So if any of you guys are looking to volunteer this summer, I'm just throwing that out there. That might be a project some of you might be interested in, get close to home. So that's where we're going with this, our Tyndall work. I think it's been really fruitful, and now we're going to start applying what we've learned there to some other sites in the area. And that's it.
Any questions for Jeff? Are you serious? Come on.
Tim.
I do want to first say that is amazing. Susie is an amazing dog. Who knew?
No, Susie's person, Shiraz is dog.
Shiraz is 4 foot.
Oh, right. You're not sure.
Susie's him. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's kind of more of a general question about the effigy vessels
Uh-huh.
and this sort of ritual killing before the firing.
Yes.
Really fascinating. I mean, already right, with the complicated stamp, you have evidence of possible specializations by being able to match these paddles. Any indication? I mean, has anything been done looking for specialists at, locations, workshops for making these funeral?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, well, especially with the Ween Island effigy vessels, there have been people that have speculated that there was a special class of people that were making these effigy vessels. Absolutely. That's actually one of the things I want to do with the PXRF, is start seeing if some of these vessels, are they local to Tyndall? Or are they coming from one of the larger sites like Holomoki or someplace like that, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but that's certainly a possibility that there was, sort of a group of specialized potters, because it's clearly ritualized ceramics. It's just everyday pottery.
Right.
That doesn't mean that everyday pottery couldn't end up in a burial mound. It did. A lot of the burial mound pottery, especially in the Swift Creek period, it's sooted, it's been used. So it was everyday wear, but then it becomes special, it becomes ritualized once it's put in the burial context. It could even be used in a funeral feast or something, which makes it special too. But some of this pottery was never intended to be used at all. It's purely for that. It wasn't even intended to hold anything, so it's not even like the goods that were in the vessel is the offering. It's the vessel itself, and that's an interesting thing. That's so I don't. Yes, people have definitely speculated that there were people making this that was a specialty.
Killing the pot seems like a dangerous job, and making a pot that's already dead seems even more dangerous. You might expect it to be kind of. We don't want this in the village.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Did you see a lot of seasonality in the occupation in the village based on faunal remains?
Mike, you'd be a better one to answer that because you did more with the faunal.
For the life of us, we cannot get seasonal indicators in these sites. We don't have a lot of quahog. We got scallops, so we know they're there during the summer. But you can't develop a season on just one species. Carla Haddon at the University of Georgia has come with us and worked on these sites. She's doing her dissertation on that now, and she's actually gone out there and trying to develop new animals, new shellfish in particular, out of which we might get seasonality. She's doing isotopic studies and taking water readings. So in a year or two from now, we might have a better idea
We're hoping.
of seasonality.
Was there much presence of freshwater faunal remains?
Freshwater
Yeah.
faunal remains?
It's those amphibious species that can venture into salt water,
Right.
but they're always rare. You know, you might get a gar every once in a while, or mullet can be in both. So nothing definitive. But they have freshwater ponds on the island, so they could be, and we got lots of freshwater turtle. So,
A lot of our dates came from turtle
I was
ponds.
wondering whereabouts, just in general, was this one in Colin
It's down, think about this, it's just on the east side of the river. What's that, off of,
what was the question?
where's Birdham?
Refuge?
Birdham is south of town, off of Obadiah Road, you know, where Cola Beach Road is.
Yeah,
Right there.
it's on, it's
It
right on.
borders the wildlife refuge. It's
Right.
private.
That would,
Borders the wildlife
it'd
refuge.
be nice if they could purchase it, that'd be great. And protect it.
And we're working on that.
We're working on it.
Where did Moore's cache of things that he took out end up?
I'm sorry, where did?
Where did the things that Moore found in the
Oh,
valley, where did they end up?
some of it is at the Smithsonian, some's at the Peabody.
Wow.
And it's all big museums up north. They got all the nice stuff. Quote, nice stuff. There's more.
You can go on the web, or you can ask I think it was Cornell or Peabody sent us pictures
Yeah.
of what they have.
Really nice stuff, much better than the ones in Moore's book. You know, the stuff that didn't make the cut, he would refer to as inferior ware.
But I will say this, Moore's pictures
Mhm.
are far better than Peabody's.
You think?
I think so. Peabody's are in color,
They're in
but
color.
Moore's got the beautiful lighting.
I like the
They're
color.
pretty
Any of the ceremony where we go to determine what was done?
Actually, we did some residue analysis from the Weed Nile, the larger Weed Island ring area. And it was, we did several. Some of it was inconclusive. One of it was on a Carabel pumpkin vessel. It came back with Zamia, which is, it's an edible plant. And so that it's, I know in South Florida,
Coontie.
I'm sorry?
Coontie.
Coontie, right, it was pretty popular. So, you know, I hate to go there, but it could be some indications they were beginning at horticulture, you know, at that point. You know, that's Weed Islands, that's getting closer to Lake Woodland. So maybe they're starting to grow some things to sort of maybe supplement the shellfish. I was hoping for blackjack.
But what did you find that in areas where there were not many shells, as many as you expected, was that rounded out with other types of things they were eating? I mean, increase in other foods?
Carla was looking into that. You know, there was you would expect deer and things like that, and we did get some of that. And but you know, honestly, until she's finished her study, I'm not sure if I want to say for sure, because I only had a glimpse of certain things, you know.
The theory is that Weed Island started out in agriculture.
Right.
So the assumption is that they're switching to agriculture.
Right.
What the heck they're still
Right.
staying on the coast for?
Well-
They have territoriality, where else they're going to go?
And that's more of an inland model, you
Yeah.
know. On the coast, where you got sandy soils and this easy access to shellfish, you know, do you really need to do that? But the Zamia may be an indication of the beginnings of that.
Was there any indication what the early interaction of those two cultures were?
Well, I mean, let me talk about the term culture, the way we're using it here,
Well,
because that implies, it tends to imply different people, and we don't, you know, there's really no indication that these are different people. We call them archaeological cultures, okay, which is, you know, there seems to be something going on different in the archaeological record. Again, that's just what's preserved, which is usually ceramics. You know, so you're really just talking about two different ceramic traditions. You know, we don't necessarily mean that these are different people. Okay, but that said, you know, if they're having a dramatic change in their mortuary practices and things like that, you know, maybe there is a little bit more going on. But that's a good question. Are there new people coming in and bringing these ideas with them? You know, and maybe intermarrying with the locals? We don't know. So that's kind of what we're trying to get at.
Right.
I would love to be able to do DNA testing on them.
Well, I hope you do and come back.
What, do you have any evidence from botanical remains that the transition from Swift Creek to Wheaton Island might reflect an adoption of agriculture?
Well, yeah, I mean, that may be part of it, absolutely. Like I mentioned, there's evidence of zamia, which is a plant that's could be a result of horticulture. So possibly, that would be, but that's not the only indication we have so far. And that was just in the Wheaton Island. But we haven't done any residue analysis on the Swift Creek stuff, so we don't know.
Any differences in the given remains between these two sites? Does anyone ever look
Can't
to
really
see?
do anything with the human remains very much, and they were so fragmentary.
When they were originally.
Oh, and more.
Yeah, did he take any measurements?
A little bit, every now and then, and this is another thing that just frustrates me about more, sometimes they'll make a comment, like, oh, it's like the skull had been flattened or something, but it's always just anecdotal and kind of useless and frustrating.
Is Swift Creek and Wheaton Island pottery, did they temper them differently, or is it they use this?
No, they both use sand temper for the most part. They temper it, at least in this area. There wasn't much difference there. I will say this, Wheaton Island paste, though, tends to be, at least the sort of the standard view, is that it's a much better paste, much more compact, and it seems to be refined a little better. But in truth, I'm not so sure how, I don't think it's that defined. In seeing, having a site like here, where you get this continuum, I actually think it's not that much of a break. I actually think it's just, they were sort of getting better over time. We've got some of in the Swift Creek area, some of those plain ceramics are really well done as well. So I'm not sure that's sort of our official thing.
I've never seen Cooney north of South Florida.
Yeah, we got it. It's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it grows. Apparently, it does grow down there. At least on the barrier islands. We went looking to try to find some too. We weren't able to find anyone, but we've been told that some of the local biologists there think that it does grow there. Now, was it only grow there because these guys brought it in? Who knows?
I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but looting on the base, is that an issue?
Yes. Not anymore, not so much anymore, but it was at one time. In fact, those two Swift Creek vessels that I showed there come from a collector that's on the base. He did his collecting 40 years ago and had the permission of the base because they didn't care.
But they make it hand?
Not that one. That one was
Inside.
more found out. The one I showed two of the Swift Creek vessels with the stamping. That was from a collector.
That was remarkable to see this guy
Yes.
peering over inside the boat.
Yeah, that's one of the more famous Wheaton Island ones, and that's from Harry Hammock. That came out of the large mouth.
Okay.